All right. Joel neglected to mention at the beginning that if you hear the tornado sirens, we go to the basement of this building, which is a little more entertaining in some way. Well, it's more comfortable than the basement over at the Union. It doesn't have as many interesting nooks and crannies as over at the Union. CERIAS has a 20-year history, and along that history, we've had many different organizations who have been in our partner program. Some have left for various administrative reasons. Sometimes it's changeover of strategic direction. But we always welcome them back in any guise because they're friends, they're supporters, and we're all fighting for the same things. Our next speaker is someone who represented a national agency that was part of our strategic partnership program for a number of years in the early 2000s. So he was a member of the board. Some of the pictures that we were showing the other day, he was in one of them at one of the poster competitions, helping to judge some of the posters at that time. And so we thought it was really a good idea to invite Mark back, given his position. Now, I wanted to mention here NRO. How many of you know what the NRO is? Okay, probably about a quarter. So let me just say, there are a number of intelligence agencies that are part of the U.S. government, and the National Reconnaissance Organization is involved in geospatial intelligence. So in that word salad, basically the idea is that if we are going to conduct any kind of intelligence operations or military operations, it's a good idea to know what is the landscape, what is the area, what is there, what has been moved there, what's been moving in the area. And that's effectively one of the missions of the NRO, which is to manage various assets that observe what's going on in the landscape, to analyze it, and to send those results to various agencies and organizations that need that information in a timely fashion. So it's a very vital part of the intelligence community, not well known, but they have a lot of interesting security problems, particularly in communications. Mark has been with the NRO for 25 years. He has a career of 37 years in the intelligence agency, first as with the CIA, and then eventually getting into this position, directing security at NRO. A wealth of experience in a very demanding area. So we thought he could bring some of that information here, not only to tell you about some of the challenges, but to project forward with what he sees as some of the interesting problems in the future. So please join me in welcoming somebody who's working on the front lines in a very interesting way, and a real friend of CERIAS, Mark Spangler.
Thank you. Spaff, before you get out of here, I wanted to kind of thank you, and I want to give you a commemorative coin from the NRO. If I can find which pocket it's in. There you go. Thank you for the long relationship we've had. And then I wanted to give you an anniversary present, since it's your anniversary.
I hope it's not another bobblehead.
Anyway, on behalf of the folks at the NRO and our cyber warriors out there, all the work that you and the center does, we appreciate the partnership over the years, and hopefully that will bring you much joy.
When it's full.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Spaff. Thank you, CERIAS, for the invite this year. I'm going to kind of present kind of maybe a lighthearted, maybe sometimes serious look at some of the challenges in today's cyber battle space. And I'm going to try something new, so bear with me. We're going to do a audience participation. So I know how this goes with animal acts, too. Jerry, I'm going to need your assistance. Would you pass these out to 4 people that you know?
That I know?
Uh-huh.
Okay. At random?
Well, people you know. All right, Jerry, would you ask them to go ahead and open those right now, all at once? All right, we'll start up here. What was your gift?
You're a zombie. Welcome to the bot.
Jerry, what did you do?
I thought I was being nice. I gave him a gift.
All right, who's got another one back here? Oh, we got some bugs in there. Well, and what does your tab say? Nice. Anybody else? You got some bugs too? Nice, nice. And lastly? You are most popular in your company right now. Right. Nice, nice, nice. So, maybe, yeah. So, just kind of a lighthearted example of Jerry was used to distribute spear phishing attacks for you guys. The problem is, Jerry, why did you do that to these people? Now, question is, why did you open it? Because it was from Jerry? Did you trust him? No, you didn't trust him. But you were inquisitive to see what was in there, right? So a little bit of today's discussion is going to talk about kind of the human condition, because part of our IT system, the large part of it is that biological element sitting in front of the keyboard. And we can have all the protections in the world, but if we don't attack that element of the system, we'll continue, as we have for the last couple of years, on users defeating our well-planned security architecture because they just have to. They have to open the present. There could be something good in it. And I guess if you realize that the FBI had to put this on their online fraud page to said that you still cannot win the lottery that you haven't bought a ticket for. Okay, I don't know why they had to say that, but apparently that still works. Anyway, so what about this? We've heard a lot of discussions about the upcoming cyber war. A lot about cyber Pearl Harbor was mentioned about 2 decades ago by the SecDef. And then cyber 9/11, when it comes. If you ask Sony, if you ask Target, if you ask Equifax, they would probably argue that it's already here. And I know that my folks go to work every day with the war footing that we're in the battle already. Those folks that talk about the upcoming are a little bit late to the game. We're already fighting the war. And so understanding kind of that mindset about being a battle space commander, understanding what your battle space looks like is imperative to managing it and surviving. Whether you're doing DoD or whether you're a pharmaceutical company or a tractor company, there are adversaries out there, and they came to work today and will get bonuses for getting your data. And if you don't understand that, then you'll have to move over to the column of victim. So we want to talk a little bit about that and maybe prevent ourselves from landing in the victim column without a fight. So today, I'm going to go ahead and talk about these 6 areas. Know your user, Know your AOR, anybody familiar with that? Area of responsibility, that's our battle space. And how it's changing today, in today's environment. Know where your data is. Know what type of data it is, where it is, sensitivity of that data. It is now very challenging. So sometimes you don't even know what country your data is in. With certainly distributed cloud services, hard to tell where your data might be. And then we're going to look at the adversaries, look at who's out there, what their motivations are, and try to put on the hat or the hoodie, because all hackers wear hoodies, right? And then look at some best practices. So I'm going to walk through this story with these two folks, Flo and Joe. Name them whoever you want, but we're going to look at those biological elements of our system. And whether you're the sysadmin or you're just an employee or you're the CISO of an organization, you really need to understand who they are. Right? If I have people who live in a cyber battle space where they're on the phone all day with the credit company trying to get their credit back, they're not an asset to my organization that day. That's lost productivity. And so that I need to be concerned about where those folks live in order to make sure that they're safe. And so some of our education has been targeted at not just inside the workplace, but when they leave the workplace, before they go home and they stop at the gas station or they do a point of sale on the way home, they need to be understand some of the adversaries are waiting for them outside the building as well. So we're going to look at the battle space. Anybody recognize this battle space? Maybe the history folks in the room. So if you can't articulate to the CISO or the C-suite what's inside and what's outside, what's your responsibility and what's outside your control, then you probably don't have any right to be spending corporate money on that. If you can't articulate this, then you need to go back and do your homework. Because I run into a lot of organizations that are very enamored with fancy tools, and they go out and write big checks, but they don't know where to put them in their architecture. They don't know where they're best used, or even if they need that tool. But the slides and the sales pitch was very good. You need to know where your points an adversary might attack you, much like a fire inspector knows where the source of ignition started. You should be able to look at your architecture and notice the top 10 places an adversary would first be encountered, where your IP space meets an adversary's IP space. And we call this intelligence preparation of the battle space. We're going to use a lot of, let's say, warfighting terms, but as I said earlier, we are in this battle, and I don't intend to go quietly. So, important here to know where your allies are and where your troops are, what their sizes are, what their capabilities are, where your adversary is, so you can deploy countermeasures appropriately. If you have sensors on your network, but they're deployed because the engineering people are in this building and this is where they wanted to put the sensors because it was raining out and they didn't want to go across campus, it would be important to understand that you have a topography of your network and understand where placement of those sensors is important. You could waste a lot of money and think you're watching the adversary when you have your sensors in the wrong spot. So I don't know if anybody has, I was giving some folks an example of this over the course of the conference. I went into a group and I was excited because the group, one of the elements in the group was a mapping branch. And I said, well, this is great. I'm finally going to get this essay of our battle space. And so first meeting with them, I sat down, I kind of gave a little bit of a history of where their branch was. We had funded for 2 or 3 years. And I was excited to see their product. So I said, where's the map? They said, well, we do mapping. I said, yeah, where is the map? I want to see the map. And they referred me to a spreadsheet full of IP addresses. And so I pulled it up, looked at it. I said, I can't make any intelligent decisions off of this data in this format. It has no context. It lacks the kind of the so what. Where are these devices in relationship to the adversary? Where are they in relationship to the core parts of my network that I don't want anybody to be able to get access to? They gave me a phone book of the county, and I wanted the Rand McNally. And so when we start mapping, we need to understand that just because I run tools like ITPy, Red Seal, some other tools, doesn't mean you're doing the job. You have to, that gives you raw data. Sort of like Dick, you would tell you, you're getting raw data, but you haven't converted it into intelligence yet. Right? So having mapping and understanding your battle space are two different things. So without this, these are the items that you need to understand through that process. You have to understand what your mission essential functions are. For your organization, we'll use the one that's, I guess, most popular in discussion this week, which was get the beer out. If you're running a brewing company, your mission essential function is get the beer out. And it doesn't really matter if you were under cyber attack, if you had a flu that took out half of your workers, or if one of your conveyors broke down. At the end of the day, through all of that storm, if you didn't get the beer out, you aren't achieving your mission essential functions. And so if your organization hasn't sat down and mapped those out, what those core mission essential functions are, that's really kind of an elementary first step, because I don't know how to deploy countermeasures around kind of an amorphous blob unless I have a clear picture of what your mission essential functions are. Because then I can do critical path analysis and identify the systems that support that. I need to make sure that when I'm doing that critical path analysis, I expand the aperture, open up enough to understand that if this is a mission critical facility and I turn off the fire alarm, the fire marshal will do my job for me. He will evacuate the building and interrupt your mission essential function. If you need cooling for your server room and I turn off your chilled water, the heat alarm will do my job for me. I don't actually have to come into your facility. I don't have to booger with I can interrupt your mission essential functions in that way. And so when you look at what your mission critical function or mission essential systems are, you need to understand the extent of dependency on systems that may fall outside of the traditional look that we look at for servers and routers. And then part of that is identifying those critical assets that have to happen. If you identify critical path and you've identified that, I only have one server and it is critical to those operations. Does it have redundant power supplies? Does it have a redundant, do I have a failover in case that inevitable crash does happen? So basically doing some resiliency analysis on that critical path. And then you talk a look about the critical path and see where in that critical path your adversary would have access. And so you're looking for exposure. Is my mission essential function exposed to an adversary where they could interrupt interrupt its execution. And then looking at the battle space, you should be able to pull some stats because that's the beauty of IT. We can really set the settings to collect any number of things. Doing it wisely is an art, not to collect everything, because collecting everything means you collect nothing. Nobody has enough time to read that, and you can't make sense. But you have to understand what is critical. So if I had this battle space map, and I understood that I get 30 hits on that particular interface down on the left corner, but I get none over here, I now understand where the adversary is targeting me. And so I can move resources there to defend against it. Is it passive monitoring at that point? Is it inline blocking, tackling? So I can match my defenses to what attacks I'm seeing in the network. And then your intel sources. If you're relegated to sitting inside watching lights blink and alarms flash, you're trying to fight this battle with one hand tied behind your back. The importance is to kind of get out and take that strategic look at the battle space and try to get a look at what your adversary is doing in that space. Is your adversary attacking other vendors in your same group? Have you talked to the CISOs or the CISOs at other organizations in your same line of business? What are they seeing? Are you pulling down the commercial indications of compromise that come off of some of the intel sources? Because there's a plethora of information out there about understanding adversarial tradecraft. And if you don't understand that, it's hard to assemble the right protection strategy for your organization. So let's go on to take a look at more of our duo here. So what does their battle space look like? Everybody probably touched one of those or is touching one of those devices right now. It's an access point, right? So if it's connected to your network, now you have a kind of a distributed way of ingesting things into your network. It's also a point where your users are going to be targeted. And we're going to talk a little bit more specifically about understanding what your personal battle space looks like. Anybody recognize any of the blocks up here? So these are on our today's battle space. Our data's at Target, our data's at Equifax, or maybe not at Equifax, in other places. I was telling somebody yesterday, when I was a victim of this one, right, Blue Cross Blue Shield, they signed me up for credit monitoring. And so I followed the procedures, I called the folks up, and what was the first thing they asked me? They asked me the very data that they had stolen, right, that got stolen. And the little light bulb went off in my head going, so you want me to trust you again with the same data that you had stolen? And it's not just these companies, it's also the credit monitoring companies that have been attacked as well. So kind of a personal decision on whether you're going to use one of these services or not, but understand that those large volumes are really honeypots for an aggressor, because where are you going to go to collect millions of profiles? You're going to go large companies that have large data. And you need to be aware of that. As simple as the gas pump, if you're using your corporate card, going to disable your small business because you impede your drivers from getting their product to market because their card gets skimmed. Back in, let's say, historical, we had some issues with toll fraud. Small companies, they get whacked from toll fraud and have $50,000 bill last month from the phone company because they got their phone system taken over. The phone company's not particularly sympathetic, when they said all of your calls went to Venezuela. They said, do you have any corporate business with Venezuela? Well, then why did you allow your switch to talk to Venezuela? So same kind of vernacular that we need to use with some of our corporate systems. I don't think anybody up here has not been affected, because in some of these cases, I think the Equifax one was half the people in the United States. Anybody have Yahoo? Any impacted by the Yahoo account? Yeah, so that was a billion people that were affected. So this is the battle space we're living in. So it's really a constant flow of these data breaches that are going on. And we have to understand that that's not going to just affect our employees at work, but it's also going to affect their productivity at home. And so part of that is not bringing bad behaviors like opening stuff you get from Jerry with a trust model, but they have to understand what they're getting into and what liability they have when they open that. A lot of companies have gone to spear phishing training. They send out a spear phishing test message every month, and if an employee clicks on it, they need to go and take some refresher training. I don't know if any of your companies do that, but right now, spear phishing is the #1 concern that we have for employees circumventing our protections. And so let's look at that battle space a little bit more. I'm going to kind of reach back to, last year you heard Greg Tuhill talk about Tuhill's law, about 1 human year equals 25 years of computer life. So you really have to look at your company and decide, are you flying the Wright Flyer or are you in a Raptor? If your company isn't keeping up, then they're probably leaning towards the victim column, because those systems get patched and upgraded, and most of those are critical flaws that the manufacturers are pointing up and patching. And if your folks aren't patching their systems, they're targets, ripe targets. You're not making the adversary work hard for it. And so what we want to do is make it hard, raise their cost to exploit you so that they go on to somebody else. It's like putting the lights around your house and you make them go to the neighbor's house. If you keep your patches up, inherently hackers are lazy and they want the ripe fruit, and they don't want to have to work hard for it. Dedicated resources and a lot of manpower, they're going to get into your network. The vast majority of people will go on to somebody else. And then planning. Part of this is planning. If you're not planning for a data breach or system failure, you're not doing your company any good. You need to white card this, at least with the board, to understand what their responsibilities are, what they would do in when it does happen, because it's going to be when, it's not going to be if. And the time you want to be scratching your head wondering what the process is not the time you have a very large breach. You want your legal folks involved, and you want to have a good understanding of what each of their responsibilities are to ensure that corporately they've provided due diligence and due care for that data. If your company's not keeping their systems patched, they're not watching for the adversary, it's hard to demonstrate at the end of the day when a data breach goes out and loses a bunch of customer data that corporately they've done due diligence and due care. So right now I think the tide is shifted. I saw last week when Under Armour got hacked and some data taken, it wasn't so much focused on the attack, but on Under Armour's response. They responded within like 4 days of the breach, and they had very aggressive action and kind of were commended about their response time and their ability to recover. And I think as we see this concern evolve, we're going to see less concern about did a breach happen, because most folks are going to have one, and it's going to be on what did your company do responsibly to first prep their networks, and then also did they display due diligence and due care in customer information. All right, let's go into this one. So identification of those, I was surprised last night. I talked to a couple companies that I would have guessed would have segmented their networks already, that customers don't need to be on the same domain as your secret sauce. I was shocked to find out that they weren't. They had just one amorphous blob of a network, and they weren't segmented. Anecdotally, I looked at the Sony hack, and I had heard that the decisive decision came very early, that from their CISO to sever that business unit. He wants to announce that their company got a contract, right? They immediately become a target, so they can see a spike. They can see a spike in attacks right after the public announcement. So your adversary is watching. They're seeing who gets in the Federal Register on federal contracts, but they are watching corporate mergers. He said one of the more nefarious ones is that when his company is going to purchase another small company, they can count on that other small company's network being penetrated prior to them taking over and pulling them into their nest. What they found is once the merger is agreed upon, the spending locally on patching and keeping that network up to date goes down, and they become a larger target for folks that want to get into your corporate network. They'll get a foothold into another network that you will incorporate into yours. So if your company is doing a lot of acquisitions of smaller companies, be very wary of how you go about incorporating those folks into your network. If you have a business unit that just will not comply with keeping their standards up, I have seen very effective use of domaining them off from the rest of the company and letting them fend for themselves, because you do have a responsibility to the enterprise, and if you have one business unit that you just can't get the leadership to adhere to some of those core principles of keeping their systems up, you need to make some decisive decisions about not continuing to send them nagging emails. You need to make an action to prevent the rest of the network from being drawn down to that level. So who's hacking you? So what about attribution? I'm going to talk a little bit about where these attacks are coming from. In no particular order. This is just kind of a sample map. But if our adversary, if we're going to get attacked from an IP in, say, Finland, is that, what if they took out one of our critical infrastructure systems? What if they took out the northeast power grid from a DDoS attack originating from Finland? Are we going to war if they take out a weapons system? I mean, that's really a debate right now, is how do you respond in kind? In the kind of the traditional measured response on a cyber attack really hasn't been resolved. And attribution doesn't come immediately. If somebody sent a missile, we could understand where it was launched from, we could understand who built it, and we could immediately respond. Cyber is a much different animal. And how do we respond in kind? And that's a dilemma that I think that certainly everybody here is going to be involved in as we have more and more, let's say, assertive attacks. And one that we're going to debate, especially if we see attacks on critical infrastructure, civilian targets, and things like that, how do you respond? Joel, got any suggestions?
I'm wondering if yellow or red are the attackers.
Probably both. So in this map, I think what we've seen is that more sophisticated folks, you can't really tell where they're coming from because they're using somebody else's system to do that. That's kind of a smart approach. If you're lazy, then you're going to be probably coming out of this northern region right here and attacking directly. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those attacks. So what about reducing the attack surface? Kind of wanted to open up the discussion into what could you do corporately to reduce your attack surface? We had a little discussion earlier with a company, and they quit doing BYOD. They said corporately we made a decision that our attack surface had to be smaller in order to manage it. Managing those devices is difficult, and it opens your company up. Now, depending on your business and your criticality, it's a corporate decision on how much risk you want to take. I kind of gave the example. I was monitoring somebody. It was my brother. Worked for a manufacturing company, and he was logging into his corporate industrial control system remotely, and I kind of watched him through that process of logging in. And he did user ID and password. He pulled out his RSA key fob, put in I was like, okay, well, I thought you made soup in that company. And he said, well, we do. And so I watched further, and I asked him what the system was doing, and it was doing hardware authentication. It wanted to know that this was the device that had been issued to him, and then it was doing configuration verification, that nothing had been modified on the device before it let him in. And then once it was done, knowing that he was who he was supposed to be, that it was a device he was supposed to have, it was still loaded with the load that they had loaded it, it patched him. So it brought his patches up to the corporate level before it even made it onto their network. And so he went on to show me kind of the very, very high-speed production that was going on. And I said, well, that seems very sensitive. Why would they allow you to do that remotely? And he said, well, you think it looks like the high-speed production system. I'm on a proxy looking at the system. It would be foolish to allow anybody remotely to make these changes from outside the company. And I said, wow, that was pretty good. And that was a decade ago, and that was protecting soup. So, it made me feel warm that there are companies out there that do take corporate or their mission essential functions seriously and put in place mechanisms to protect that. I wish that transferred across many domains that are, let's say, more critical than soup. All right, so let's look specifically at some target opportunities here. How about this guy? Anybody know him? Is he a threat to your network? Is he? I don't know. All right, so if I came in the morning and somebody said, overnight, we lost 1,000 safes of information. It disappeared from the company. We can't find it. That everybody would stop working and we would find that. But I would imagine that if in your company you lost one laptop, couldn't find it, the same response isn't there. It's just a laptop. But I think in some cases we think about all of this storage kind of flippantly because it's just become commonplace. And I can probably steal most of your intellectual property off of a pen. And this comes down to kind of this network hygiene, right? Are you managing your devices down to the user level appropriately where you can't get data off of your network easily? This one especially, this will clean out most companies. And if you don't manage, that's a huge liability. Any disgruntled employees in here? I didn't think so. But corporately, if you have a network that you haven't taken those protections against, you are opening your organization up to huge liabilities, both from data going out and special data coming back in. So let's talk a little bit about all that data that's going out. So the data going out, let's talk about data breaches. We've been talking a little bit about it, but let's go to this line right here. Last year, according to the Poneman study that produces this every year, this was last year's total, $141 per record. Well, this is fine if you just lose one record, but you lose 1 million customer files with this information, suddenly the cost of doing business that year is going up, and maybe your bonus is at stake this year because most companies can't take that out of hide. And so you're going to see a pop-up of insurance in the marketplace to protect against breach. I think I talked to somebody over the course of the conference that said their company does use insurance carrier to kind of transfer to the but that cost of insurance is certainly going to have to be incorporated. And if you can prevent this by low-cost control of some of those exfiltration techniques, two-factor or two-person integrity at some of those critical junctures where you have data leaving. I was kind of relating that I was carpooling one time with some ladies, and they worked at a medical testing facility, and they probably didn't understand why I was asking because they worked in billing, but I was asking them about USBs. Something came on the radio that spurred that conversation, and they described their facility as having probably 2,000 people working in it, and they said there was only one person in the company that had the authority to remove data from the network with a USB or burner. And they asked me, well, why would anybody want to do that? Because that's where the information's protected, and why would we want to take that protected data and move it somewhere onto a media that's not protected? And so if you looked in your company and how you do your missing essential functions, you really have to understand how much of that convenience you're going to prescribe before you've tipped the scale and you're really fighting a losing battle with trying to protect the flow of your data off of your network. Anyway, this is broken down on breaches by sector, business sector. So, any mathematicians in the room? Vicki? Yeah, so if you add this up and that figure from the last page, you get in the factor of like $23 billion. That's a lot of cost to corporate productivity, doing cleanup. You don't buy anything for that. That's just sponsoring identity monitoring for clients that you've lost their data for, press, working with your attorneys on liability, proving that you did due diligence. So if this is the discussion that you have in your C-suite, this is why you need to be a active member of that discussion, because this is what will buy you some a seat at that table. Because if you can show the organization that you're not a liability, that you're not just there to spend their money, that you're actually there to save them money in the long run, that makes you a partner, and not, you don't become, security doesn't become a liability to them or an added cost. So let's look a little bit at the breaches of the causes of the breaches. So these are the hoodies. This is Joe. We talked about Joe. This is him. He's causing these problems. System error. So through whether it's disinterest, lack of training, if you could take a 28%, almost 30% of the concern away by reinforcing user education, two-person integrity, about preventing those losses, this would be a big win for your organizations. These, I'm not sure we're going to do a whole lot about preventing, but I think in the case of remote access to your networks, if you're really looking at those points of exposure, you can drop this one as well. Remember, we're not looking for the perfect, because if you go into this with the understanding that there will be a breach and it's just a matter of time, you need to educate your folks on what they're going to do when it does happen. And if you can get them to that point of acknowledgement, the further discussions that will go much better on, let's white card this, let's walk through it a couple times. And then what I found is business unit leaders are very complimentary a month or two into this process, that they know, they hear in the radio, so-and-so got breached this morning, and they know, oh, I know exactly what we would do when that happens, because it will eventually happen to them. All right, so let's go a little bit deeper on what this actually is going to look like on your cell phone. Anybody get this one this morning? Anybody want to get rid of their student loan? I get one of these calls almost every single day. It's a new federal program. It's got to be trustworthy, right? Yeah, because only the Fed does acronyms like DOE, stuff like that. Anyway, this sounds really good. Schmishing, anybody familiar with that term? Schmishing, phishing, SMS phishing. This is an attack surface. Anybody know what the abbreviation for the 419 scam is? It's a quiz. There may be a prize. 419. Anybody? Oh, we got one in the back. What is it? That's right. Let's give him a prize. Yeah. So what he said was it was the Nigerian statute against fraud. And so this nicknamed the Nigerian Advanced Fee Scheme. They're not really interested. I almost get one of these every single time I list something on Craigslist. I get an immediate response that says, I'm really excited in your item. I would like to purchase it. Unfortunately, I cannot come to your location, and I will have to have a shipper arrange. They're not really interested in your item. They're not really interested in the cost. They're looking for that $200 or $300 extra that they're going to give you for the inconvenience of working with their shipper. They're looking for that advanced fee part. I like to play with those folks sometimes. I don't know about you guys, but it's actually become a sport, spam baiting or scam baiting. I had one on the line for about a half an hour the other day. He was calling from somewhere probably Pakistan or India. He was going to refund me $199 because I had overpaid the purchase of a service maintenance contract on my laptop. Anybody gotten this one? Yeah, so he told me, in order to process this refund, I need you to do this on this, I need you to go to this site. I was like, this sounds exciting, $200. So I'm typing away on the keyboard, appearing to sound in the receiver like I'm doing the link. I said, this thing is not working. And then he, talked me through some other stuff like, well, hit the Windows key. And I said, well, what do you mean by window? Is it the one with the flag on it? I don't understand what you mean. My keyboard doesn't have that. He got very frustrated. But he was obviously using a knowledge base, right? So like a help desk, he had a knowledge base. I could tell he was looking up what operating system I had. I was just making something up. And he was giving me the prescription it told him to tell me, right? And then it was basically trying to enable remote desktop. After about 30 minutes, I got kind of tired, and I told him I had to go, and I said, I don't really appreciate you calling, taking, and he was kind of arrogant. He said, well, this is what I do to make a living, and I said, well, does it work? And he goes, all day long. Yeah, it's sad that does, and they do prey on people. My own father, he got taken by somebody appearing to be from Google, Gmail, and they loaded a crypto blocker or locker on him, and he ended up having to go to the Geek Squad to get it cleaned up. But it's unfortunate that there are a lot of people that are out there being preyed upon. One of the kind of the more insidious ones is kind of up next. I don't know if this audio clip will work. Let's see. Let's see if I can tune up the volume here. All right, well, I'm going to just describe it to you. Has anybody gotten the IRS call? Oh, okay, good. Terrible, right? Apparently it's worded in such a way that it has some hook words in there that really kind of trigger things within you. And so whoever crafted kind of the dialogue, it's in the one that I received was in a mechanized voice, like a recorded voice. You really couldn't tell that it was a foreign person calling you, but they're talking about, and apparently they've preyed on thousands of unsuspecting folks that don't want to have any problem with the IRS. And so as long as it keeps working, but these are the same people that work in your building, right? These are the same students and grandparents that you all work with and have. And so they're all part of your workforce, and they're part of the people who will be distracted. And I have employees maybe weekly that click on things they shouldn't. Redirects, spam. It's just part of that human condition that we need to factor in to our management on the battle space. Oh, which one? Nice. Yeah, and a lot of times you can't get them. They'll hang up before the recording, but you can't. I got a most of it on this one. All right, so I have now. Here we go. All right, so let's go a little bit more tactical. Do you have a problem with this in this area, the skimmers? Yeah, so I'm not sure how long these skimmer items are really cheap. I think I looked one up the other day, and I could get the whole setup for like $20, and it was, that's pretty good. Not that I would ever do that. But some of the more expensive ones, our police in the Northern Virginia area said if you find one, like their advice is shake it. They basically run up and shake the heck out of it, and if it comes off, leave immediately, because they have had some issues where the adversary would come and try to retrieve their device, and there would be some ensuing problem. So, but these are tough. I mean, tough to this one especially, and this one down here, this model looks almost exactly right. So what we've seen in our area is security tape. So I guess for a while, until the adversary buys some security tape, that's their countermeasure. So how does that concern your company? I think we talked a little bit about, yeah, if you're delivering products and your driver gets the corporate card skimmed, it's going to impede their business. Also, if I'm on the phone all day trying to get mine reset, it's going to impact my productivity. The next one, I guess, the discussion here is a little bit more of a concern because a lot of these we've been talking about for decades, right? So here's another quiz question. There may be a bug or another treat available. So what was last year's most used password? The high schooler, yes. Number 2 last year. That's it. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yay, winner. Here we go, Joel. Anyway, how does that happen, right? You start asking the critical path analysis stuff and say, why? Why is that? How, if we're really computer security folks, how could we allow that to happen? Who's managing those networks that allow users to enter passwords like that? And apparently, a lot of us work in places that don't, they allow users to get away with passwords that way. That's fundamental. And where we're missing the gap, I don't know. And so that's more of a troubling fact. Part of this is hygiene, too. We didn't talk a lot about hygiene of networks, but what I found is a lot of the stuff, even on the DoD scorecard and some of the other scorecarding efforts, are talk about just basic network hygiene. Are you keeping your networks up to date as far as patching? Are you configuring and keeping configuration control of your network devices? For instance, if you identify that you've done a really good job of defining you're defining your battle space, you have 2 main areas that your network goes out to the internet for primary and redundant, and you've really interrogated the settings on your firewall, do you lock those configurations so that if any change to those firewalls, immediate alerts in your SOC? Because what I found is most people aren't doing that. They don't use the tools that are available that will identify those critical items in your protection architecture and lock them down. Because as we saw from that other slide, human error, so many times I have good intentioned sysadmin folks get inside and they change something. And we've certainly seen examples of very critical interfaces were bypassed and no one knew about it for significant amounts of time because we're just not instrumenting them as we should. They're not instrumented as critical nodes in our network. And so that goes back to the network hygiene. If part of the the CS program here at Purdue, I don't know if they stress that or not, but once you build it, you gotta maintain it. right? You can't just walk away, deliver it to the customer, and walk away. There isn't something inherent in the liability that you created something and you need to nurture it, or it dies. And what I've seen is networks where engineering folks will deploy and then walk away, and there is no money left for keeping the system up or maintained. And so that's kind of the coalition of the willing need to kind of bond together and say we're not going to behave that way anymore, because it become a liability to our organizations if we don't maintain those systems. All right, so let's look at some of these. Educate your family. Your laptop's sitting around at home, got a teenager, pops it open to look up something, goes to some site, get your corporate network infected. That never happens. Safeguard your devices, especially when you're traveling. If you're traveling to an area that has a very, let's say, aggressive government, that you could probably consider your device compromised. So don't take your corporate laptop there, okay? Buy a cheap throwaway, and once you're done, throw it away. All this review your statements goes along with kind of the review your logs. You got to have, if you're doing logging and auditing of your networks, you have to have knowledgeable people who actually know what they're looking at. The worst part is finding a network where there are logging, they're producing logs. No one's trained to look at them. No one knows what they say. And so the worst thing would be finding something months and months and months old that was a problem. And then this issue of answering those social networking calls. I don't know if the phone company or that industry is going to police itself, but as you saw from that earlier slide, that was just in one day. All of those out-of-area calls that I got, those were all in one day. All right, so let's look ahead, see what we got coming up. Data breaches. They're going to continue. My prediction is more of those. It's not going to be much about if you got breached, but how you acted after the breach. Were you prepared? And so if this is kind of the foot stomper, convince your folks that it's going to happen. We just need to have our plan in place when it does. Having a very kind of order of battle. This is what Bill, Sally, and Tom do on the day that we discover we have a breach. This is who we're going to call. A lot of companies, let's say they get completely inundated and they have a whole business sector that's been polluted, and they're going to have to do a hard rebuild. I don't know about you, but that's going to put a stress on most businesses. How are you going to get 400 or 500 clients? And if you have to replace servers, routers, and other devices on the network, do you have an acquisition process in place to do that rapidly? I read a cleanup story about a one at the Pentagon. It took 2 weeks to reconstitute the network. And they considered that a success. How many business could sustain being off for 2 weeks? Not many. So be on the alert. You got phishing at work and at home. I don't know, as many times or many tools as you put in place, you're always going to get those spear phishing attacks with payload into somebody's inbox. Some tools are better than others. Some are crafted in such a way that they've been able to bypass. You need to understand who the target is at your organization. In spear phishing, anybody heard of whaling? Yeah. So you need to know who the whales are in your organization. We have a list of the most targeted people in our organization for spear phishing. And we talk to them, and we have security officers talk to them to make sure that they understand they've been a target, and they will get these messages to, if any do get to their mailboxes before we've quarantined them and deleted them, they need to understand that they have a responsibility. They are part of the security architecture. Social engineering, it's still my favorite because it always seems to work. If you haven't seen some of go to the FBI page and look. It's disturbing and kind of entertaining at the same time. People want to believe stuff like they won, $1 million or something like that. And inherently you can get them and you can manipulate them if there's just a glimmer of hope. And, I read a study one time in the past couple weeks about why some of those scams are so blatant, right? Have you noticed that some of the scams, the wording is so blatantly false? The context of the language used is just so outrageous that nobody in their right mind would believe that. And so there's one contention that's why they're crafted that way. They're done that on purpose because they don't want to waste their time on you folks. They want to cut the group down to the most gullible people in the society, right? So that's why they're crafted in such a way to kind of exclude the folks taking a first glance at it. Still going to continue because it works. Identity theft, certainly up. Your decision, we talked about monitoring. It's kind of a personal decision. Voicemail, that's kind of the social engineering. And some of them are just, you can make a living just validating it's a working phone number. Right, so the mere you picking up the phone gives them a say, okay, that's an active line and somebody answers it, not a machine, not a Google number, whatever. And so that's a data point. Yep. No. Right. Right. Yeah, in fact, I actually seen that on my phone. I get the same first 6 digits, and they call every day, and they still remind me that a federal grant has washed away my student loan. If I'd only click on this email. Skimmers, I'm kind of on the fence on this because with the advent of the chips, everybody chipped now on their cards, or we still got some legacy ones out? Most people now have the new chipped cards. I'm not sure how that's going to work and factor into skimming because it's up the game a little bit. So I'm sure that somebody smart will figure out how to circumvent that. So that's kind of I'm on the fence. IoTs. Right now, I think I talked about this a lot. I think we're going to see a little rise in malicious activity, just kind of the proof of concept. Can I mess with this? Because people like to mess with us, right? As you saw in that, there was a clown on there. There's always some clown out there who's going to mess with you. And then privacy. I think you heard yesterday from Michelle, her old boss. Do you know when that quote was, the privacy's gone, get over it? You know when that was? Right, 20 years ago. And it hasn't gotten any better, right? And if it was gone then, I don't know where it is now. I think certainly it's generational, and depending on where you're coming from, it's sort of privacy's in the eye of the beholder. I think as Spaff had said, it's really dependent on what your background has been. All right, let's go to So these are kind of the kind of the leave behinds that I'd kind of recommend looking at, that you really do have to understand your users, what they're trying to do on your network, where they go. If you're a company that, we'll kind of just foot stomp this, if your company doesn't have any business dealing with, well, you just use Venezuela again. Do you have any corporate business in Venezuela? Well, then why would you allow your network to talk to IPs in Venezuela? I mean, it's an old concept of geo-blocking, but when we used this a long time ago with toll fraud, it kind of made sense, going, yeah, why would our network be talking to IPs in Kazakhstan? Unless I have business there, and I don't have any business there, right? So if you're a company that has the luxury of having a fairly defined market, you can do some things to limit your exposure. And understanding your space, you need to make sure that you can articulate that. You really don't have any right to be spending corporate dollars if you can't articulate the kind of the return on investment you're going to get from it. So if you're going to be seen as kind of cross that line between a security guy who's a liability and he's going to cost me money, to one that's aiding the mission essential function, making sure it is protected and can always produce revenue, then you're going to put a different hat on. Manage your data when possible. Personally, who knows where your data is, but you ultimately have an understanding of what your tolerance is for how much exposure you want. Stay aware of the adversary. You're going to need to keep up on what the adversary is doing, both to your employees at home and are you being targeted. If you do a merger and acquisition, you really need to understand what an adversary sees. It's an opportunity to get into your network. And then we've foot stomped the 5 a lot. This one is, it's going to happen to you. You better plan for failure. This one is hard to understand because people seem to live in this denial phase that, no, we're spending enough money, this won't happen to us. It's going to happen. Either it's going to be a small scale or it's going to be large scale. But either way, it's going to cost you. And then you got to stay vigilant because, after all, this cyber war that we talked about for many decades, we're actually fighting it every day. So welcome to the fight. And that's probably all I have to leave you with, unless there's any questions. Yes?
Yeah, on your statistics you had, if you briefing, the cost for a data breach, does that include like the business loss, IT loss, loss of reputation, and that kind of thing, or is that just the cost of remediation?
It does factor in those as well, those ancillary costs. It's a good study. If you haven't seen it, I would recommend taking a look through it because it does talk about different sectors respond differently to breaches. I think right now, if you're in the financial sector, data breaches are a lot different animal than they are in, say, if you're Target or Under Armour. Seen a little bit differently by customers. Any other questions? No? I'm going to turn it back to Joel. Thank you.